I still remember the sound of paper tearing, that sharp ripping noise echoing across the living room like something inside me was being ripped apart too. My aunt stood there with a smile that didn't reach her eyes while my cousins watched like it was some kind of show, and my mother just sat quietly pretending none of it mattered, pretending like the $5 million check in my hands was just another piece of paper, something disposable, something meaningless. But it wasn't meaningless, not to me, not after everything Grandma had said the night before she passed away. She had called me into her room, her voice weak, but her eyes clearer than ever. She held my hand tighter than she ever had before, and told me something that didn't make sense at the time. She said, "Not everyone who smiles at you wants to see you win, and not everyone who stands with you is on your side." I thought she was just speaking in riddles like she sometimes did, but then she reached under her pillow and pulled out that envelope and placed it in my hand. "This is for you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and when I asked her why she didn't answer right away, she just looked at me with that same calm expression she always had, like she already knew how everything would unfold, like she had already seen what was coming next. "You'll understand soon," she said, and then she closed her eyes. I didn't open the envelope that night. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Something about it felt heavy, like it carried more than just money, like it carried a responsibility I wasn't ready for, but the next morning everything changed. The house was filled with voices, loud, sharp, impatient. Everyone was talking over each other, arguing about what belonged to who, and who deserved what. I stood there quietly, holding the envelope in my hand until my aunt noticed me. "What is that?" she asked, her tone shifting instantly, and before I could even respond, my cousin snatched it from my hand and tore it open without asking, without caring, without even looking at me, and when he pulled out the check, the entire room went silent. $5 million. The number seemed unreal even to me. I stared at it, trying to process what I was seeing, but before I could say anything, before I could even breathe properly, my aunt laughed. "This has to be a mistake," she said, shaking her head like she was rejecting the reality in front of her. "Grandma would never leave something like this to you." Her words hit harder than I expected, not because they were surprising, but because they confirmed something I had always felt but never wanted to admit. I wasn't seen the same way in this family. I never had been. My mother finally spoke, but not in my defense. She just said, "Maybe we should look into it. Maybe it's not real. Maybe it's just some old document." And that was all it took for them to start questioning everything, questioning me, questioning Grandma's intentions, like she wasn't even gone yet, like her final decision didn't matter. "Give it here," my aunt said, reaching for the check, and when I hesitated even for a second, she grabbed it forcefully from my hands. "This is ridiculous," she continued, her voice rising, now almost angry. $5 million to him. What about the rest of us? What about everything we've done? And then it happened. Before I could stop her, before anyone could say anything, she tore the check straight down the middle. The sound was louder this time, sharper, more final. My heart dropped. No one spoke for a moment, not even me. I just stood there frozen, watching the pieces fall to the floor, like everything Grandma had given me was being erased right in front of my eyes. "There you go," my aunt said coldly. "Now it's worthless." My cousin laughed, and my mother looked away again, like she didn't want to be part of it, like pretending not to see it made it okay. I bent down, slowly picking up the torn pieces, my hands shaking, not because of the money, but because of what it meant, because of how easily they had destroyed something that wasn't theirs to destroy. "You shouldn't have done that," I said, quietly, my voice barely steady. And my aunt just smiled. "What are you going to do about it?" she replied. I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say, because in that moment it felt like they had already won, like there was nothing left to fight for. So I walked out. I didn't argue, I didn't shout, I didn't try to explain anything. I just left, holding the torn pieces of the check in my hand like it was the only thing I had left of her. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying everything over and over again, the way they looked at me, the way they laughed, the way they didn't even hesitate. And then, the next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, but something told me not to. Something felt different. So I answered. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end, and then a calm, professional voice spoke. "Is this the grandson of Mrs. Harrison?" My heart skipped a beat. "Yes," I said slowly. "This is the bank manager speaking." And what he said next changed everything. For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong, like my mind was still stuck in yesterday, still trapped in that moment when the paper tore, and everything fell apart, but his voice stayed calm, steady, almost too calm for what he was about to say. We have been trying to reach you since yesterday, he continued, and there was something in his tone that made me sit up straight, something serious, something important. I didn't respond right away. I just waited, my grip tightening around the phone, like I was holding onto something fragile. There seems to have been an incident regarding a check issued under your name, he said. My chest tightened. Yes, I replied, slowly choosing my words carefully. It was torn up. There was a pause on the other end, but not the kind of pause that comes from confusion. It felt more like he was expecting that answer. I see, he said finally. And then another pause, longer this time, like he was deciding how much to say. Sir, he continued, I need you to come to the bank as soon as possible. There are details regarding your grandmother's account that can only be discussed in person. My mind started racing, instantly questions piling up one after another, but none of them fully forming.
Is something wrong? I asked.
No, he said quickly, almost reassuringly, not wrong, but important. Important. That word echoed in my head long after the call ended. I didn't waste time getting ready. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell my family. I just left. The drive to the bank felt longer than it should have, every red light, every turn, every second stretching out like it was trying to slow me down, like something was waiting on the other side of that door. When I finally arrived, the building looked the same as always, nothing unusual, nothing different, but the moment I stepped inside, everything shifted. The receptionist looked up at me, and before I could even say anything, her expression changed, like she already knew who I was. One moment, please, she said, quickly reaching for the phone. Within seconds, a man in a suit appeared from behind a glass door, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. Mr. Harrison, he asked. I nodded. This way, please, he said, gesturing toward his office. The way he spoke, the way everyone suddenly seemed attentive, it felt strange, almost unreal, like I had stepped into a completely different world overnight. His office was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small movement feel louder than it should be. Please have a seat, he said, closing the door behind us. I sat down slowly, my heart beating faster, now the tension building with every passing second. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a folder, thick, organized, labeled. When he finally sat across from me, he placed it carefully on the desk between us. Before we continue, he said, I need to confirm something. I nodded, unsure of what he meant. Did you personally destroy the check? The question caught me off guard. No, I said immediately. It was my aunt. She tore it in front of everyone. He studied my face for a moment, like he was measuring something, like he was looking for any sign of doubt. And you did not authorize anyone to handle that check on your behalf?
No.
He leaned back, slightly exhaling in what looked like relief.
Good, he said.
Good. I didn't understand how any of this could be good. Sir, he continued, your grandmother was very specific about her instructions, very specific. He opened the folder and turned it toward me, revealing documents, pages, signatures, official seals. The check you received was not a simple personal check. I frowned, trying to process what he was saying. What do you mean? He slid one of the documents closer to me, tapping lightly on a section highlighted in bold. It was part of a secured transfer agreement tied to a protected account. Protected? Yes, he said, and there were conditions attached. Conditions? I felt my chest tighten again. What kind of conditions? He paused for just a moment before answering. The primary condition was that the check must be presented intact by you personally within 48 hours. My stomach dropped.
Intact.
The word hit harder than anything else. And if it's not, I asked, my voice barely steady. He held my gaze this time, not looking away. Then the agreement activates its secondary clause.
Secondary clause.
Everything inside me felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. And what is that? He closed the folder gently, his expression calm but firm. The funds are not lost, he said. I blinked.
Not lost.
No, he continued, in fact, they are redirected. Redirected? To where? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the folder again, pulling out another document, this one different, more detailed, more complex. Your grandmother anticipated the possibility of interference, he said quietly, almost like he respected her even more now. Interference. My mind flashed back to yesterday, the tearing, the laughter, the way they didn't even hesitate. If the check was tampered with, destroyed, or presented by anyone other than you within the required time frame, he continued, the full amount would be transferred into a secured account under your name, with additional legal protections applied. I stared at him, trying to understand what he had just said, trying to connect all the pieces. So you're saying? He nodded slightly before I could finish. The $5 million is still yours. My heart skipped. But what? But due to the violation of the primary condition, the amount has increased. Increased. Yes, he said calmly, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Interest penalties and a contingency bonus clause were triggered. My mind went blank. And the new total, he continued, sliding the document toward me, is... I looked down at the paper, my eyes scanning the numbers once then again, because it didn't feel real. $7,500,000. I couldn't breathe for a second. 7.5 million. The room felt smaller suddenly, like everything was closing in around me. How is that even possible? I whispered. Your grandmother planned very carefully, he said simply. And then he leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting just enough to make the moment feel heavier. There is one more thing. My chest tightened again. What? He held my gaze steady this time, not looking away. Because the check was destroyed by another party, without authorization, legal action can be taken. Legal action? Yes, he said, any individual responsible for interfering with the transfer can be held liable under financial obstruction laws. My mind instantly went back to my aunt, the way she smiled, the way she tore it without a second thought. They can be held accountable, he continued, and if you choose to proceed, the consequences could be severe. Severe. The word echoed in my head just like important had earlier. For the first time since yesterday, something shifted inside me, something changed. They thought it was over. They thought they had taken everything from me. But they had no idea. Not yet. I leaned back slowly, my hands finally steady, my thoughts clearer than they had been in a long time. What do I need to do? I asked. And the bank manager gave a small nod, like he had been waiting for that question. He didn't rush his answer. He just looked at me for a moment like he was measuring how ready I really was, like he wanted to be sure I understood. What came next wasn't just about money anymore, it was about decisions, consequences, and everything that follows when people cross a line they can't come back from. First, he said calmly, you need to sign a confirmation acknowledging the transfer and the activation of the secondary clause. I nodded without hesitation. He slid the paper toward me and placed a pen beside it. My hand didn't shake this time, not like yesterday, not like before. Something inside me had settled, something stronger than anger, something colder. I signed. The moment the pen left the paper, it felt final, like a door had closed behind me. Good, he said, placing the document back into the folder. Now the second step. I leaned forward slightly. If you wish to pursue legal action, we will provide full documentation, including security records, account instructions, and witness statements, verifying that the check was destroyed without your consent. My mind flashed back again to that moment, the tearing, the laughter, the way they looked at me like I didn't matter. I didn't even need to think twice. I want to proceed, I said. He nodded once, as if he had expected that answer all along. Then we will begin immediately. The word immediately felt powerful, like everything that had been delayed was finally moving forward. He picked up the phone and made a short call, his tone professional, precise. Within minutes, another person entered the office, a woman carrying a tablet and additional files. She introduced herself briefly, but my focus was already shifting, already moving ahead to what this meant. They walked me through everything step by step, signatures, confirmations, authorizations, each one pushing things further, each one making it more real. By the time I left the bank, I wasn't the same person who had walked in. Not even close. The air outside felt different, lighter, but sharper at the same time, like everything around me had more clarity. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, just staring ahead. 7.5 million. The number still didn't feel real, but what felt even less real was what came next. Accountability. For the first time in my life, they weren't in control. For the first time, they couldn't laugh it off or dismiss me or pretend I didn't exist. This time, there would be consequences. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove somewhere else, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could think. I parked and just sat there, replaying everything from the night before to this morning, every word, every look, every choice they made. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could take anything they wanted. They thought I would just accept it like always. But not this time. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. Unknown number again. I stared at it for a second before answering. Hello. There was no hesitation on the other end this time. It was my cousin. His voice sounded different, not confident, not mocking, something else, something uncertain. Hey, he said, trying to sound casual. I didn't respond. Listen, about yesterday, he continued, we were just confused, emotions were high, and I hung up. No words, no reaction, just silence. A few seconds later it rang again. This time I declined. Then again, and again, until it stopped. But it didn't take long for the next call to come. My mother. I stared at her name on the screen longer than I should have. Then I answered. Why did you leave like that? She asked immediately, her voice carrying that same tone, like she was the one who had been wronged. I let the silence stretch just long enough. You let them destroy it, I said finally, my voice calm but firm. There was a pause. We didn't know it was real, she replied quickly, almost defensively. You didn't ask, I said. Another pause, longer this time. We can fix this, she added, her tone softer now, like she was trying a different approach. No, I said quietly, you can't. She didn't respond right away. What does that mean? She asked. It means it's already done, I said. Before she could ask anything else, before she could push further, I ended the call. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger fades. This was something else, something sharper, something that doesn't rush, something that waits. By the time I got home, there were already messages, waiting, texts, missed calls, voicemails, all of them saying the same thing in different ways, confusion, excuses, attempts to pull me back into the same place I had just walked out of. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I placed my phone on the table and sat down. For the first time in a long time, everything was quiet. No voices, no arguments, no pressure. Just silence.
And clarity.
Hours passed before there was a knock at the door. I already knew who it was. I didn't need to check.
But I did anyway.
Through the window, I saw them, my aunt, my cousin, and my mother standing together. For a moment, none of us moved. Then the knocking started again, louder this time, more urgent. I opened the door slowly. The moment they saw me, they started talking all at once, words, overlapping voices, rising, the same chaos as before, but this time it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt distant. You need to come with us, my aunt said quickly. We need to go to the bank and explain everything. There was a hint of panic in her voice now, something I had never heard before. It's already handled, I replied calmly. Handled how? My cousin asked, his confidence gone, replaced with something closer to fear. I looked at them one by one, letting the silence settle again before answering. The check is no longer the issue, I said. They stared at me confused. Then what is? My mother asked. I held her gaze this time, not looking away.
What you did, I said.
The words landed heavier than anything else. My aunt let out a small laugh, but it didn't sound real, not like yesterday. Don't be dramatic, she said. We can sort this out. No, I replied. This isn't something you sort out. It's something you deal with. Their expressions shifted again, confusion turning into unease, unease turning into realization. What are you saying? My cousin asked quietly. I stepped back slightly, opening the door wider. I'm saying you should leave, I said. And before they could argue, before they could push further, I added. Because the next time you hear from me, it won't be like this. It will be through someone else. Someone official. Someone who doesn't forget. The silence that followed was different this time, heavier, more real. For the first time, they didn't have anything to say. For the first time, they didn't laugh. And as they slowly stepped back, turning away one by one, I could see it clearly. They were starting to understand, but it was already too late. I closed the door. And this time I didn't feel anything pull me back. Only forward. The next few days moved faster than anything I had ever experienced, but at the same time, every moment felt sharp, clear, intentional, like nothing was slipping past me anymore, like I was finally awake while everything else was just catching up. The bank kept their word. Documents were prepared, statements were recorded, timelines were built piece by piece. Everything that had happened that day was no longer just a memory, it was evidence. Every laugh, every word, every action, it was all there, written, documented, undeniable. I didn't need to exaggerate anything, I didn't need to add emotion or explain how it felt. The facts were enough. And the facts were heavy. heavier than anything they expected.
My phone stayed quiet after that day.
No more calls, no more messages, no more pretending. Silence. But it wasn't peace. It was waiting. Because something had already been set in motion. And once it starts, it doesn't stop, just because someone regrets what they did. A week later, the first notice was sent. Official, sealed, direct. I didn't see their reactions, but I could imagine at the moment the envelope was opened, the moment the words were read, the moment everything they thought was over suddenly came back louder, stronger, impossible to ignore. Financial interference. Destruction of a legal instrument. Liability.
Consequences.
Words they had never taken seriously before. Words that now had their names attached. Another week passed. Then another. Meetings were scheduled, statements were requested, responses were demanded. They couldn't avoid it. They couldn't laugh it off. They couldn't pretend it didn't matter. Because this time it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from a system that doesn't bend for excuses. I was called in again. Not to argue, not to defend, but to confirm.
To verify.
To stand by what had already been set in motion. The room was different this time, larger, more formal, more distant. They were there too. My aunt, my cousin, my mother. Sitting across from me. But they didn't look the same. No confidence, no smirks, no dismissive glances. Just tension. Just uncertainty. Just the quiet realization that this wasn't something they could control. They avoided eye contact, at first, like looking at me would make it worse, like acknowledging me would somehow confirm everything they were trying to deny. But denial doesn't work when everything is already in writing. The questions were simple, direct, precise. Did you destroy the check? Yes. The word barely left my aunt's mouth. Did you have authorization to do so?
No.
Each answer tightening the space around them. Each word locking things further into place. My cousin tried to speak at one point, tried to explain, tried to shift the tone, but it didn't change anything. Intent doesn't erase action. Confusion doesn't cancel consequences. And for the first time they were hearing that not from me, but from someone who didn't care about their reasons. Only their choices. My mother stayed quiet most of the time, her eyes down, her hands still, like she was hoping silence would protect her like it had before. But silence doesn't protect you when your presence is part of the problem. By the end of it, there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain, nothing left to fix. Only outcomes. Outside the building they finally approached me. Not together, not confidently, but slowly, carefully, like they didn't know what version of me they were about to face. Please, my mother said, her voice lower than I had ever heard it. We didn't think it would go this far. I looked at her for a moment. It already went too far, I said. My aunt stepped forward, next, her tone different now, stripped of everything it had before. We can settle this, she said. We can figure something out. I shook my head slightly. You already did, I replied. My cousin finally spoke, his voice tight, controlled, but breaking underneath. What do you want from us? I held his gaze this time, steady, calm, certain. Nothing, I said. That was the truth. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want excuses. I didn't want to fix what they broke.
I just wanted it to be what it was. Real.
Final. Inescapable. The process didn't drag on forever. It didn't need to. Everything was already clear. And when the final decision came, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it wasn't emotional. It was simple. They were held responsible. Financial penalties, legal consequences, restrictions that would follow them long after this moment passed. Not because I pushed it, but because they created it. They signed it into reality the moment they tore that check. Weeks later, everything settled. The noise faded. The calls stopped completely. And for the first time in a long time, there was no shadow of them hanging over anything I did. The account was secured. The amount untouched. 7.5 million sitting there, not just as money, but as proof. Proof that not everything can be taken. Proof that some things are protected in ways people don't understand until it's too late. I went back to the house once. Not to stay, not to reconnect, just to stand there for a moment. The same walls, the same rooms, the same silence. But it felt different now. Empty. Like something had been removed. Not taken. Removed. I walked through slowly, remembering everything, not with anger, not with regret, just with clarity. And when I reached the living room, the place where it all started, the place where they thought it ended, I stopped. For a moment, I could almost hear it again. That tearing sound. But this time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like the beginning. I turned and walked out without looking back, because there was nothing left behind for me anymore. Only everything ahead. And somewhere in that quiet space between what was and what comes next, one thing stayed clear. They thought they destroyed my future. But all they did was sign their own ending. Time didn't slow down after that. It didn't need to. Everything had already shifted, everything had already fallen into place in a way no one expected, especially them. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into something quieter, something steadier, something that didn't need noise to feel real. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't suddenly change my life overnight. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore, because the proof was already there. Sitting in that account, untouched, solid, undeniable. 7.5 million. But it was never just about the money.
It was about what came with it.
Freedom, distance,
Control.
things I never really had before. I moved out, not far, not somewhere extravagant, just somewhere peaceful, somewhere that didn't carry echoes of voices that never really supported me. The first night there felt strange. Not lonely.
Just quiet.
The kind of quiet that doesn't press on you, the kind that gives you space to think clearly, without interruption. I remember sitting by the window, looking out at the empty street lights glowing softly in the distance, and realizing something simple but powerful. No one knew where I was. No one was calling. No one was demanding anything. For the first time, everything was mine. My time, my space, my decisions. And that feeling stayed. It didn't fade. It didn't get replaced by something else. It became the foundation of everything that came next. I started building slowly, carefully, intentionally. Not flashy, not loud, just real. I made choices I never thought I would get the chance to make. Investments, plans, opportunities that didn't feel like dreams anymore because they were backed by something solid. But even then, I didn't rush. Because I had learned something important. Fast changes attract attention. And attention brings people. People who remember you differently. People who suddenly see value where they once saw nothing.
And I wasn't interested in that.
Not anymore. Months passed before I heard anything about them again. Not directly. Not from them. But from someone else. A distant relative, someone who still stayed connected to the family in ways I chose not to. The tone was different when they spoke. Careful, almost hesitant. Like they didn't know how much I already knew. Things had changed.
For them.
The penalties had hit harder than expected. Financial pressure, restrictions, reputations, shifting in ways they couldn't control. The same people who once stood loud and confident were now quiet, careful, measured. Life had adjusted around them, not in their favor. I listened without reacting, without asking questions, without showing interest. Because none of it pulled me back. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered had already been decided. Long before they realized it. Long before they tried to undo something that couldn't be undone. The conversation ended the same way everything else had ended. Quietly. No closure needed. No final words. Just distance. And that was enough. One evening I found myself going through old things, papers, photos, small reminders of a life that felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. And then I saw it. The envelope. Not the original, but the one I had kept. Inside it were the torn pieces. The check. Still split, still damaged, still showing the moment everything changed. I sat there for a while just looking at it. Not with anger. Not with regret. But with understanding. Because that moment, that exact moment, was where everything turned. Not when I received it. Not when I went to the bank. But when they tore it. Because that was the moment they made their choice. And that choice shaped everything that followed. I carefully placed the pieces back into the envelope and sealed it again. Not to hide it, but to keep it. As a reminder. Not of what I lost, but of what I gained.
Clarity.
Strength. Distance from people who never truly stood with me. And as I placed it away, I realized something else, something even simpler. I didn't need revenge anymore. Because this was never about getting back at them. It was about moving beyond them. And I already had.
Completely.
The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, the light coming through the window soft, calm, steady. I made coffee, sat down, and looked out again at the same quiet street. But this time it felt different. Not new, just certain. Like everything had settled into place exactly where it was meant to be. No tension, no unfinished thoughts, no questions left hanging. Just direction. Forward. And as the day began like any other normal, simple, steady, I picked up my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just silence. And for the first time, that silence felt like the loudest confirmation of all. They were gone. Not physically, but from my life. From my decisions. From my future. Completely. And somewhere in that stillness, one final thought settled in clearly, without doubt, without hesitation. They didn't just tear a check. They tore their place in my life. And unlike that check, that was something that could never be put back together. But even then, I didn't rush. Because I had learned something important. Fast changes attract attention. And attention brings people. People who remember you differently. People who suddenly see value where they once saw nothing. And I wasn't interested in that. Not anymore. Months passed before I heard anything about them again. Not directly. Not from them. But from someone else. A distant relative, someone who still stayed connected to the family in ways I chose not to. The tone was different when they spoke. Careful, almost hesitant. Like they didn't know how much I already knew. Things had changed. For them. The penalties had hit harder than expected. Financial pressure, restrictions, reputations, shifting in ways they couldn't control. The same people who once stood loud and confident were now quiet, careful, measured. Life had adjusted around them, not in their favor. I listened without reacting, without asking questions, without showing interest. Because none of it pulled me back. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered had already been decided. Long before they realized it. Long before they tried to undo something that couldn't be undone. The conversation ended the same way everything else had ended. Quietly. No closure needed. No final words. Just distance. And that was enough. One evening I found myself going through old things, papers, photos, small reminders of a life that felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. And then I saw it. The envelope. Not the original, but the one I had kept. Inside it were the torn pieces. The check. Still split, still damaged, still showing the moment everything changed. I sat there for a while just looking at it. Not with anger. Not with regret. But with understanding. Because that moment, that exact moment, was where everything turned. Not when I received it. Not when I went to the bank. But when they tore it. Because that was the moment they made their choice. And that choice shaped everything that followed. I carefully placed the pieces back into the envelope and sealed it again. Not to hide it, but to keep it. As a reminder. Not of what I lost, but of what I gained. Clarity. Strength. Distance from people who never truly stood with me. And as I placed it away, I realized something else, something even simpler. I didn't need revenge anymore. Because this was never about getting back at them. It was about moving beyond them. And I already had. Completely. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, the light coming through the window soft, calm, steady. I made coffee, sat down, and looked out again at the same quiet street. But this time it felt different. Not new, just certain. Like everything had settled into place exactly where it was meant to be. No tension, no unfinished thoughts, no questions left hanging. Just direction. Forward. And as the day began like any other normal, simple, steady, I picked up my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just silence. And for the first time, that silence felt like the loudest confirmation of all. They were gone. Not physically, but from my life. From my decisions. From my future. Completely. And somewhere in that stillness, one final thought settled in clearly, without doubt, without hesitation. They didn't just tear a check. They tore their place in my life. And unlike that check, that was something that could never be put back together.